Good evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Sarah Scalzitti, and I am representing a project known as E-Form 3 in the American Government and Politics class. So tonight I'm going to be talking a bit about reparations and the consideration for reparations. So the assignment read, Ta-Nehisi Coates, a prominent American essayist, published an essay recently advocating reparations for economic injustices done to African Americans. And there were multiple articles on that. One of them was from David Froome. The other was from Coates. Another was from Chris Hayes. And another was the original essay titled "The Case for Reparations" by The Atlantic. So, again, this specific project focuses on advocation of reparations for economic injustices done to African Americans. My argument would be, why should only African Americans be considered? What about American Indians and all of the hardships that they went through? After all, we, the U.S., took their land from them. The American Indians were here way before we arrived, and European white man took Indian land away. So one of the other articles I do want to focus on, I have many articles, is in regards to the impossibility of reparations. So this is the article by David Froome, titled "The Impossibility of Reparations." So the issue, first of all, reparation. What's a reparation? It's paying back, reimbursing someone for something that they went through that was wrong. So you can give a cash amount for somebody's wrongdoing, and that's supposed to make things better. Okay, so the impossibility of reparation focuses because it's not just that particular group of people that you're looking to give reparations to. It's also about, how do you allot the money? How do you give the reparations? How do you identify someone that should receive reparations? Do you give it to the group as a whole, the minority as a whole? Do you provide it to an individual? If you provide it to an individual, you have to look at what they've been through, what their family has been through, what their ancestors have been through, the extent of whatever the hardship was that they went through, and then go from there on how much money they should receive and for how long. So again, the overhead of reparations is an overhead, and then all of these underlying aspects are very complex and detailed. So the other aspect is, if you're going to give reparations to African Americans, then you should really take into account all of the other minorities or groups that have been wronged in this particular country. For instance, Froome states that Mexican Americans who were deprived by the Mexican-American War of the right to migrate into half of their former country. What type of reparations should they receive? Should they receive any? What about the Japanese Americans that were interned during World War II, put in internment camps and stuck there? Should they receive something for the time lost in their lives? Are the Chinese Americans the victims of the coolie labor in the Oriental Exclusion Acts? Many people know we have excluded many groups of people within this society, but that particular group faced an awful lot of hardship. Should they receive something? And, of course, you need to look at the Native Americans. I prefer the term American Indians. And others say indigenous people. What should they receive? So African Americans were not the only people that went through long periods of hardship. Uh, the, the the African Americans, they they went through 250 years of slavery, and this is according to the case of Reparations by the Atlantic. 250 years of slavery. That's an incredibly long time, and it's terrible. But there are so many other groups in society that have gone through such hardships. Look at Jewish people and what they went through with the Holocaust. Should every single person that comes into the country or that's in the country receive a money or something for what they went through? Where would the money come from? So another point I would like to touch on in regards to Froome's article, the impossibility of reparations, is that if reparations means remembrance and repentance for the wrongs of the past, he would wholly have reparations. He supports that. And if reparations means intensifying the nation's commitment to equal opportunity for all its people, and most especially for the descendants of those once enslaved, then again he says, let's have reparations for better schools, more jobs, some form of universal health coverage, and an immigration policy that does not exert endless downward pressure on the wages of Americans' least skilled workers. Improved nutrition, especially in early childhood, higher taxes on alcohol, and so forth and so on. So he supports economic growth for the people that would benefit the people and benefit the rest of society. But to give a particular group or even a person a lump sum of cash in their pocket for what they went through, it doesn't solve anything. That's my personal opinion, and I would love to hear yours as well. So, again, the American Indians, just a little history of what they went through. They went through disease, massive disease. They went through warfare. They lost many things. People look upon American Indians as savage beasts, and I don't believe that they are. So the American Indians had the land before any of us were here. Any of us in reference to people occupying the U.S. American Indians, that was where they lived. That was their land, given to them by their God, and that was so their belief as well, I believe. So the American Indians, they lived on the land, and they would take care of what they needed to take care of. They would care for the land, and they could see their God through nature. The beauty of the wind, the beauty of the trees, if there were any where they were, it's just the beauty of the land, the waters, everything. And so they would live on a particular location for some time, get what resources and what food they needed, and then they would move on. They would pack up and they would keep moving. So they would transition. Some people might call it sojourners. There's another word, I just can't think of it off the top of my head at the moment. And so the Europeans saw this as an opportunity to say, you American Indians call this your land, but you don't live in one location permanently. You live here and then you move there. So how can this be your land when you don't stay? See, the American Indians, they stayed on the land so that they could get the resources they needed, and then they would move on while the resources that they used had time to grow again. The Europeans looked at this and said, well, it's not your land until you claim it as your property, and property means staying there permanently, forever. And you own something, and that's yours. And nowadays in the U.S., we own houses, and we have property, and we stay here permanently for the most part. 30, 40 years at a time, maybe. That's not what the American Indians did, as far as I know. So that was one aspect that I did want to clear out of the way. So American Indians, they cared for their land, and they did not stay in one place wholly their entire lives as a property owner. The second thing is that not only were American Indians exposed to diseases such as measles and smallpox and other diseases, oftentimes Europeans developed to some degree immunity to the diseases, but American Indians were extremely susceptible to them. In the early 1600s, they began dying in great numbers among the tribes that had contact with the new settlers. This information can be noted in the article titled "Point: The United States Owes Reparations to Native Americans." And this is written by Anderson, Tim, and Laura Finley. That would be this article here. So, not only were the American Indians exposed to such illnesses, if that wasn't enough, like I said, the ownership of land was another thing that Europeans wanted. The relocation of American Indians was another. Some know this as the Indian Removal Act. American Indians, they were told that they had an option to pack up their stuff and carry only what they could carry on their persons and go out west. I'm not sure if it was North Dakota. I can't remember off the top of my head. And I don't have that article. It was from a documentary a while back. They were told that they had that option. While you can, do it now. Take your stuff, pack it, and just take a hike literally. Leave your houses, leave whatever else you've cared for, just leave it here. Because we want this land, and we're going to claim it as ours, said the Europeans. So, some of the American Indians, fearful of war and other wars that have taken place, they just did want peace, and whenever they did try to form treaties, things became complicated, and the government lied and crafted things to be the way that they wanted them to be, so that it made the American Indians look like savage beasts. So some of the American Indians traveled, and then the other stayed, and those who stayed were told that if they hadn't moved, troops would be forced to come in, and a war would be initiated. So the war was initiated for those that stayed behind, and they were pulled out of their places of living, and they were marched in the dead of winter. And if you think the weather's cold now, or even if you look at last year, negative 15 degrees, and that's cold, well, imagine being stuck in the middle of the woods, hiking for miles and miles and miles in the dead of winter. A lot of people died. Women and children died on that journey. And still the American Indians, it's recorded in documentaries that they sang praises to their God in hymns. Hymns that the Europeans also taught Indians about. I hope to get into that discussion at another time, but due to the constraint in time, I'm unable to during this time. But pretty much to sum up that portion of what the discussion would be, Europeans came in and they made agreements with American Indians, and they gave American Indians their clothing, and the American Indians clean up and start to look like Europeans, and then they would have them go to church with Europeans, and they would learn to speak like them, and they would learn to eat meals at certain times of day instead of when they were just hungry. So this was like reshaping who they were as people. Um, and they had Indian boarding schools. I could go on and on about Indians, so my apologies. But that was the sum of the conversation. So, lastly, the last and I believe the most important thing that I do want to touch on is the hardship that the American Indians endured. So it was not just a trail of tears, that hike, that arduous journey. It was also the massacre at Wounded Knee that occurred in 1890. Um, this can be noted in the article Restitution to American Indians, an Overview. The authors of this are Al Prandini, Michael, and Cheryl Barassa. So, the massacre at Wounded Knee occurred in a period known as the Indian Wars. So, before I get into the massacre at Wounded Knee, the American Indians had this thing that they called a ghost dance. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. So a ghost dance is when they would go out, they would go up on the field from where they were staying. They were staying in a quaint tiny little town where they were provided resources from the government that was there. So they were given things like rations of food and rations of blankets and rations of items that they would need to survive for that time being. So, in certain times of the day or in the evening, the American Indians would gather, mostly women and children, mind you, and they would go up into the field and they would have a ghost dance, which is what they believed was communicating with their elders, with those who passed away, with the spirit of the guardian angel. And they would dance, they would play drums, and they would dance. No weapons were involved in this whatsoever. So they believed that by dancing all night and shouting words and just shouting and dancing, that they would make their vision come alive. The vision would come alive, and that there would be no more death. So the American, or the European, I should say, troops saw this, and they freaked out. They didn't know what they were doing, and they thought they were planning some kind of a plot to kill them or something along those lines. So they went up. The troops went up. Something, I can't remember, cavalry. I don't think it was the 77th. Anyways, it was a cavalry that went up. They were armed with weapons, the cavalry was, and they shot and killed over 250 women and children that lie dead, just because that they were dancing. And that's known as the massacre at Wounded Knee. So American Indians have gone through so many things. They still go through so many things. They have one of the highest suicide rates on the reservations. The youth do. It's just the countless things that they go through, and still to this day, though they have their own reservations, they do pay federal taxes. In fact, I did that research project on American minorities and relations a year ago. They pay federal taxes to an extent. Those that do have the casinos, they don't keep every single penny to themselves. And so they're still facing so much hardships and so much pain, and they're just trying to survive. African Americans this day and age have the opportunity to work. Some of them own houses, some of them own lands. They live in apartments. They have a decent way of living. They have the opportunity for education. If they need a resource, if they need a lawyer, they have an opportunity for an attorney or a lawyer. There are very few tribal lawyers out there, those that are focused in tribal laws. The American Indians don't fall under the same categories as our laws in regards to reservation life. So, one last thing that I do want to leave you with tonight is that the American Indians, they do have the highest unemployment, poverty, and disease rates of any ethnic group in the country. And this was dated back in 1996, this article. So if you're wondering about that time, if they had the highest unemployment, poverty, and disease rates of any ethnic group in America in 1996, what is their group like today? I'd be curious to know what the U.S. Census says as to how many American Indians are left living here today. They could they could cease to exist, and it's horrible. Something something needs to be done. Someone needs to help them. Someone needs to do something, and my heart goes out to them. My heart goes out to those that were wronged. My heart goes out to those that are hurting. But the biggest thing that we can do as people is to learn about all of these things, that these problems and these cases that are going in society today, and to arm ourselves with knowledge so that we can speak up and say something. Because so many of these things go under the table, and not many people know about all of these things, and it's easy to overlook so many things as well. So I thank you for your time, and I hope that this video did not do a disservice to the groups that I was representing. Thank you.